Hello, everyone. My name is Shandaba, and welcome to my podcast, Going the Extra Mile. As a student athlete, I'm curious to what other student athletes do outside of school and sports. This podcast serves as a platform for student athletes to speak about their lives and a space for individuals to spread their knowledge. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of Going the Extra Mile. We are here today with Mike Schretter joining us from New Jersey, I believe. He's a very good friend of mine. We're both going to be rising juniors, and I've learned a lot from Mike over the past couple years, and we're going to have a really great conversation with him today. So, Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Mike Schretter. I'm actually going to be taking a gap year this year, so I'll be a rising junior in fall of 2021. I'm on the basketball team. I've known Dubé for a few years through just classes and everything like that. Basketball team and soccer team at Amherst are really close guys and everything like that. I'm the owner also of Takes podcasts that airs on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And obviously, as Sean said, you learn a lot from the different guys in Amherst. It's a very diverse school, and I've always, been really happy to be in a diverse kind of campus like Amherst. So, yeah.
Nice. So I just want to kind of get a feel for what your school life and what your sports life is like at school. So if you could kind of tell us what you're doing major wise and what's sports like.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a psychology major. So I went to Amherst intending to do econ and psychology. As econ progressed this year, I realized that econ was not really the way I wanted to progress my Amherst life. And I have my reasons for that, but basically it just didn't fit me well. So I became a psychology major. Mm-hmm. And that really, I think, made me get into, at least at Amherst, into sports broadcasting, sports journalism, that kind of stuff, because I wanted to understand how people think. I wanted to understand why people in sports have issues, I guess, in pressure situations, issues with certain coaches, issues, I guess, with that kind of stuff, or just how they get ready for games, right? So that's what really drove me to be a psychology major.
Yeah.
And in terms of the school and sports aspect of it, from my perspective, it's a very good balance, and it's a big time management skill learning kind of curve. Mm-hmm. So you, as a basketball player, same thing as being a soccer player, everything else, you have your time where you're really dedicated to your sport. So as a basketball player, you have practices in the winter, but then the fall and the spring, you're doing pickup and lifts. Same thing like other teams are doing. They have their own fall practices and fall lifts. Mm-hmm. But then the classes are also very rigorous depending on what you take.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to balance that. And at least at Amherst, I think that the balance of that is what allows you to be really successful, mm-hmm. which I think that's always important. And also, I think the best thing about the school life is that everything's interactive.
Yeah.
And not just with the teachers, but the students too. Everyone wants to learn from each other. And I've studied with, plenty of guys in your team in psychology for sure.
I know we've studied Econ 101 or 111 together. Do you remember that?
Yeah. No, I remember that well. And it was just that's the whole point of it is it's the athletes at Amherst, even the non-athletes, they all want to work together for getting to a common goal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's always a really interesting thing about Amherst, because Amherst is a small school. People are going to be how do you build a good community there? But I think that's really how I characterize the school and athletic life is kind of just a community interactive based feel.
Yeah. How would you describe how your quarantine kind of period has been? What have you been doing since we all left? What have you been doing to keep yourself busy? You want to give us some insight?
Yeah, certainly. So I've been doing my podcast, which I'm about into my second season right now, about to finish up my second season. Mm-hmm. And it's what I've been that's basically what I've been doing during this time, mostly. Obviously I've been working out as much as I can, trying to stay ready for when the season is. But in terms of just developing other interests, I've been reading books, but the podcast has been my main thing, just because I want to be in sports journalism, sports broadcasting out of college. And I thought a podcast would be a good way to start doing that, getting yourself ready to go.
Yeah.
And I think it's been really good, and that's really made my time in quarantine really, good overall, because I've been able to really focus on that.
Yeah.
And what's been good about that podcast specifically is that it's gotten a lot of positive feedback, which I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's allowed me also to speak from my viewpoint, but also bring in news from sports that people might not know about.
Yeah.
And then allow like my opinions maybe to make them think about how they want to view sports.
Yeah.
I'm also managing my best friend from home who goes to Duke, has his own band that he's been promoting songs up on Apple Music and Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
So I work as like a marketer for him as well. And we've been collaborating on ideas about how he should be, marketing his band and how that kind of stuff. And then obviously also, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Quarantine Chef, and I've been cooking a good amount over quarantine. And, I shared something with Ramsey's recently, a chicken parm recipe, which if you follow the Quarantine Chef, you check him out.
Yeah, I follow him on Instagram.
Yeah, he's quite the chef, and that's basically that's a long-winded answer for what I've been doing during quarantine to kind of keep myself positive, I guess.
Yeah. How's your family been? Do you have siblings?
Yeah, you can probably hear one of her singing in the background, but I have 3 sisters.
Okay.
So I have a sister who just graduated from Tufts,
Mm-hmm.
and she's working in the film and media industry. And I have a younger sister that is going to Wake Forest next year. She's actually going to be going back to campus and everything like that during the COVID crisis.
Wow.
And then my last sister is going to be 16 next year. She goes to a special education school because she has Down syndrome.
Yeah.
And the family's been doing good overall. And I think everyone's being pretty positive. Everyone's trying to find things to do and keep active. Yeah. And it's been good. It's definitely been good for me because I don't get to spend as much time with my family, obviously, when you're in college. Mm-hmm. So it's been, even high school, I was traveling all over the place playing basketball. So it's been good to at least have some family time. Yeah. And also just do fun activities with your family. I mean, you probably feel the same way. You just get closer to your family, I think, if you have.
For sure. We're definitely just spending a lot more time with them than you would normally if we were at school. So it's nice. Yeah. So yeah, I have a question about kind of like this podcast and why do you think it's important for you to be doing this podcast? Yeah, so I think people are going to obviously take this a little bit differently, but depending on how they like sports or not. But I think sports is one of the best ways to bring people together. Mm-hmm. And I think from anywhere, like any class, ethnic group, like background, anything like that. You think of music and sports. And what I try to use this podcast for, the reason I created it, obviously I just described earlier how I want to be a sports journalist or commentator. Yeah. And I made the podcast also because I get really sick and tired of the fake news or the too much opinion-based news in sports. Yeah. And what I wanted to use a podcast for is to allow people to hear a different opinion, hear a little bit more of an objective opinion. Like I'm not like necessarily trying to be biased toward one player or another. Yeah. Obviously, as a commentator, you have some sort of bias, but I also wanted to use it to bring people who I'm friends with and who like talking about sports or just want to talk about, being an athlete in general together. And I think that if you look at the different podcasts I've had, I've talked about a number of definitely important issues within sports. Mm-hmm. Also, even that like stem to like even like the human rights political realm, such as Black Lives Matter. I've talked about women empowerment movements like the WNBA with some of the women's basketball team. Yeah. And I think that's obviously super important. And I think that for my podcast too, like I just want to make sure that people like watch it if they can and just like, have some fun if they're on the podcast. Like I want to make it a laid back kind of atmosphere, but also inform people more about the importance of sports and how you can use a platform as an athlete to really make, big change, especially during these tough times. Being an athlete's that much more important. And that's really where my podcast kind of stems from. For sure. And you said you're taking the fall semester off? I'm actually taking the year off. So the full year? Yeah, the full year. So what I'm going to be doing is like I'm going to be training with a couple of trainers that I have back at home. And then I'm also training a couple of kids for basketball that I'm probably going to try and take either at community college or maybe at UMass that don't count for credit, some classes for like in podcasting, sports management, and that kind of stuff, just because I want to keep my basketball game as good as I can, like get my skills as well, equipped for my, obviously my junior year in the fall of 2021. Yeah.
But I also want to make sure I'm doing stuff to better prepare myself if I can get an internship in the summer. And it's going to be a little different, obviously, having a gap year because I'm not necessarily going through the junior process, but really just stem down from the sense like I want to have that interactive learning kind of feel. And unfortunately, due to COVID, it's just not going to be that way at a lot of campuses.
Yeah.
And I also want to keep my eligibility, even though now they come out of the rule that basically if you play 50% of your games or less, you keep your eligibility.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to have to, sit in my room and not be able to interact with students because I learned from others. I learned visually. I learned from interacting. It's just a personal feeling.
Go ahead. I was gonna ask, what is like the rest of your class thinking in terms of like taking the year off or going?
Yeah. So some of the guys on our team have decided to do that, and I think there's I'm obviously not going to name names, but like there's been like 7 or 8 guys who have decided to do it. There's been other guys who decided to go up on the campus because, again, if you don't play the season, you still get your eligibility back. So I think some more guys are thinking about maybe just, trying to go through the year. Or even some guys are just thinking about just going through, getting their degree, and they're not really caring about their eligibility.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, I haven't really spoken to a ton of the guys in the team about it. We have like team meetings about it and everything like that.
Yeah.
But just from my experience, some guys want to complete their degree because it's an Amherst education. Some guys are just looking to, like in my case for gap years, just they're there for basketball as well as academics.
Yeah.
And like I value them equally. I mean, academics obviously comes first in every situation, but it's not the same feel if you're not interacting with your professors and students and being able to at least work off, feed off your friends and stuff to be able to be successful academically and athletically. So that's just the important piece there.
Yeah. And then I guess lastly, what advice would you give to other student athletes like during this time? I guess they're making decisions whether not to go to school or to, take the year off. And I guess even like your podcast, like anything, like any advice you would give to other student athletes.
Yeah. So there'll be a few things I would give. The first one would just be whatever decision you make, just make sure it's whatever makes you happy. If you value your education more, and you really are, let's say you're not an athlete, but you really value education, you want to go back to campus or you want to do online, because you have no problem doing online, then you should do that. But if you want to take the year off to kind of work on bettering yourself, work on, finding a job, making some money so financial aid is easier for you, then do that. That's where it comes to the decision. I think also just, during this time, you should just pick up other interests. I mean, I'm not only doing podcasts, I'm trying to write a story. Like I've been like writing a few like stuff like that. I've been cooking, I've been, training and so that kind of stuff. But I've also been trying to learn a lot more about business, about even politics, like what, both political parties kind of believe in a sense, and being able to try and work those together. And I think like, obviously you don't have to do all those kind of things, but just like pick up other interests will keep you from being less bored, because we all know quarantine, you get very bored because you're not able to interact with your friends as much face to face. Obviously it's tough for everyone. And obviously it's a tough time in America just with everything going on. And the best thing you can do is just try to be positive, I think. I think that's the only way you really can go in the right direction, is just by being positive and finding other interests that you haven't thought about before because you've been too busy with your sports or your academics. Yeah. And it's a tough time for everyone. So when it comes down to decision, I'm always going to say you have to weigh the costs and the benefits. And for me, I weighed basically the fact that I wanted that interactive learning experience with basketball there, because that's what, in my opinion, makes Amherst so great, is the academic component being so interactive. And then also the sports also allowing you to meet so many unique, great people that you don't normally meet maybe in like a high school that I went to. Like I went to like a suburban high school, and like, you don't get to meet people from international countries really there, people from cities and that kind of stuff. Right. So like, that's just a little bit different for me. And I've honestly found it a very valuable experience. So that's really, I guess, another long-winded answer for your question.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I definitely will say thank you. You kind of inspired me to start this podcast because I found myself having a lot of free time here. And I thought it'd be cool to kind of get perspectives from a lot of like our friends and student athletes, and, put this out there so people can see what's on our minds. And I want to thank you so much for joining us, Mike. Yeah, maybe I'll get another invite to Shretts podcast soon.
Oh, absolutely. Don't
talk about some Premier League or some Serie A, anything.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll just make sure to do my research. And,
Yeah.
obviously, like the thing about podcasts, I'll say too, is that the good thing about them is they're really low key.
Yeah.
It's a good way to converse with people. It's a good way to just connect with people that you don't normally connect with.
Yeah.
And you'll find that as the more you do podcasts, you'll get people to want to be on, just because anyone wants to just talk about something. So
Yeah.
the fact that you're also not doing it specifically in sports is also going to
Yeah.
allow more people to do that. So I
Yeah.
appreciate being on, man. And
Yeah, for sure.
you're always welcome back on Shretts Takes Podcasts. Always.
All right. Just let me know.
Got to.
All right. Well, thanks again, Mike. We'll see you. Have a good one.
Thank you for watching this episode of Going the Extra Mile. I hope you were able to take away a thought or two from the conversation. For future episodes, subscribe to my channel and make sure your notifications are on. If you enjoy this episode, pop a like. All the best.